Layla's gym was small but filled with an energy that made it feel larger than life. The worn-out leather punching bags hung from the ceiling like silent sentinels, their surface marked by years of relentless training. The floor beneath her boots was scuffed and uneven, a reflection of the countless hours spent in the ring. This place wasn't glamorous. It didn't have the polished mirrors or sleek, shiny equipment of high-end gyms, but it had something more valuable: soul. It was a place where people came to work, to sweat, and to fight for something greater than themselves. Layla had built this gym from the ground up. When she first started, the idea of a woman training in the gritty, testosterone-filled world of boxing was met with laughter and skepticism. Women were supposed to be in the kitchen, not in the ring. But Layla didn't listen to the doubters. She had always been the kind of person who thrived on proving people wrong. In her early years, she had been forced to fight not just for victories in the ring, but to prove her worth in a sport dominated by men. As the years passed, she earned the respect of the fighters who trained under her, and soon enough, her reputation as a no-nonsense trainer spread throughout the neighborhood. She wasn't just a trainer, though. Layla had been a boxer herself. She'd lived the life, fought the fights, and earned her scars. Her body bore the evidence of her past: thick, muscular arms, a strong back, and a chest that had taken more than its fair share of punches. But it was her mind, her indomitable spirit, that made her a force to be reckoned with. Layla's strength wasn't just physical, it was mental, emotional, and, above all, unwavering. Still, the prejudices were always there, lurking just beneath the surface. She had to work harder, push further, and be better than her male counterparts. In the gym, when her fighters performed well, it was often attributed to the male trainers they had been under before coming to her. She'd heard the whispers some fighters questioned whether a woman could truly know the intricacies of the sport. Layla knew that to succeed in boxing, she had to prove herself over and over again. It didn't matter how many victories she'd achieved or how skilled she would always have to fight for recognition. That day in the gym was no different. The familiar sound of gloves hitting pads filled the air, accompanied by the rhythmic thud of feet hitting the floor as the fighters worked through their drills. Layla stood in the corner, watching her newest trainee, a young man named Marcus, work the speed bag. His form was good, his punches fast and precise, but his focus was lacking. Layla was about to step in and correct his form when the door to the gym swung open with a loud creak, and the air shifted. Tyler, the well-known boxer who had recently gained attention for his aggressive style and arrogant personality, strutted into the gym. His presence was like a storm, his confidence spilling out of him in waves. He was here to train, or so he said, but everyone knew it was more about showing off than improving his skills. Tyler had a reputation for belittling others, particularly women, and his arrogance was a quality that many found hard to ignore. He had the kind of cocky swagger that seemed to fill every corner of the room. "Hey, Layla," Tyler called out with a smirk, his voice dripping with condescension. "I hear you've been doing a good job training the guys here. But tell me something, how can you possibly know anything about real boxing? You're just a trainer." Layla's gaze hardened. She knew Tyler's type. He was one of those boxers who thought his success in the ring made him superior to everyone around him, especially women. She had dealt with his kind before, loud, rude, and utterly dismissive of her skills. But she wouldn't give him the satisfaction of reacting immediately. Instead, she met his gaze with a calm that only masked the simmering fury beneath the surface. "Real boxing?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with an edge. "You think I don't know the sport because I'm not wearing a pair of boxing trunks and gloves? You've got another thing coming, Tyler." He chuckled, clearly not taking her seriously. Look, you might know how to work a heavy bag or train some amateurs, but a woman? A woman can't handle the real thing. You can't even take a punch. The taunt hung in the air, heavier than the sound of the punches landing on the bags. Leela could feel the heat rise in her chest, the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. Tyler had crossed a line, and she knew she could easily shut him down, but part of her hesitated. Was this the moment to finally prove herself to him and to everyone else who had ever doubted her? Why don't you step into the ring and prove it? Tyler mocked, his eyes glinting with challenge. I'll give you a shot. I mean, it's not like I have anything to lose. You're just a trainer, after all. The words cut through the air like a blade. They weren't just about boxing, they were about everything she had fought for. Everything she had worked for. Leela knew the weight of his challenge. If she stepped into the ring with Tyler, there was no turning back. A loss would mean more than just a defeat in the ring. It would be a public validation of every stereotype, every assumption people had made about her. It would mean that she hadn't just lost a fight, she would have lost her place in the world, her sense of self. But there was something else, something deeper. There was a fire inside her that Tyler had just ignited. The very idea of him thinking he could belittle her, could reduce her to nothing more than a trainer, stung more than any punch ever could. Leela had spent her whole life proving people wrong, pushing herself past limits others thought she could never reach. She wasn't about to let this arrogant boxer take that away from her. Tyler's smirk grew wider as he waited for her response, but Leela didn't flinch. She stood tall, her fists clenching at her sides, and with a steady breath, she stepped forward. I'll fight you, she said, her voice firm, a challenge of her own now. But not for you. For me. The room went silent as the other fighters paused to watch. Tyler looked at her, a moment of surprise flickering across his face before he masked it with his usual cocky grin. All right, Leela. Let's see what you've got. Leela didn't respond. She just climbed through the ropes and into the ring. This wasn't just a fight for her anymore, it was a fight for everything she had worked for, everything she had believed in. She wasn't just going to prove herself to Tyler. She was going to prove that no one could define her, no one could tell her what she was capable of. And as the bell rang, signaling the start of the fight, Leela knew that this moment would define everything that came after. Layla's heart raced as she sat in front of her phone, staring at the screen where Tyler's challenge had just gone viral. The young upstart, a rising star in the world of combat sports, had called her out in front of millions, mocking her age, her experience, and most insultingly her gender. Tyler was a cocky, brash fighter, a physical powerhouse who had quickly made a name for himself with his unrelenting style and his ability to trash-talk any opponent. But now, he had set his sights on Leela, a veteran in the sport, a woman who had fought her way through every obstacle the male-dominated industry had thrown at her. Layla's immediate reaction was one of anger and disbelief. She had worked her whole life to get to this point, earning the respect of the most hardened fighters in the gym, and now this arrogant young man was challenging her in the most public way possible. He had made a mockery of her legacy. It was one thing to be doubted by those who had never seen her fight, but now Tyler was going a step further. He was publicly undermining her, turning her into a joke in front of the entire combat sports community. The pressure began to mount. Layla's mind raced as she thought about her next steps. Should she simply ignore the challenge? Walk away from the fight and let Tyler's words fade into obscurity? She had the experience to know how brutal the world of combat sports could be, especially for women. She had spent her career battling not just her opponents in the ring but also the pervasive attitude that women didn't belong in the sport. She had seen firsthand how quickly the media and fans could turn on female fighters, focusing on their looks, their age, or their gender rather than their skill or determination. Leela considered the implications of accepting the challenge. Tyler was younger, stronger, faster, and already a media darling. If she lost, the ridicule would be unbearable. Her reputation as a top fighter could be destroyed, and at her age, there wasn't much room for second chances. The thought of risking everything she had worked for filled her with self-doubt. She wasn't sure she could withstand the humiliation if the fight went south. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that walking away wasn't an option. For all the doubts swirling in her mind, something inside her stirred a deep sense of defiance, a refusal to let herself be belittled by someone who hadn't yet earned his place in the sport. Tyler's challenge wasn't just about him, it was about the system that had long underestimated women in combat sports. It was about the people who told her she was too old, too slow, too weak. It was about proving that experience and skill could overcome brute strength and youthful arrogance. Layla's decision was made. She would take the fight. Not just for herself but for every woman who had been told that she didn't belong in the ring. This would be her moment to defy the expectations placed on her, her moment to show the world that she could stand toe-to-toe with anyone, no matter how young or how strong. The reality of her decision began to set in. As soon as the announcement was made, the media exploded. The fight was already being hyped as an underdog story, with Leela being cast as the dark horse, a seasoned fighter who was past her prime, facing off against the future of the sport. Fans and pundits alike questioned her decision to fight, with many doubting she had what it took to stand up to Tyler's raw power and speed. Social media was flooded with memes, comments, and insults, all aimed at undermining her confidence. Her friends at the gym were no less skeptical. Her trainer, Ben, had always believed in her, but even he seemed hesitant. "Leela, this is a different animal," he said one evening as they discussed the upcoming fight. "Tyler's not like the other guys you've fought. He's fast, aggressive, and unpredictable. You'll have to be on top of your game like never before." Leela didn't need to be told. She had always known that every fight was a battle, not just physically but mentally. She was used to the pressure, used to fighting against the odds. But this time, it felt different. This time, the stakes were higher, and the world was watching. Determined to prove everyone wrong, Leela threw herself into a grueling training regimen. Her days were filled with hours of sparring, strength training, and technique drills. She pushed her body harder than she had in years, refusing to allow herself the luxury of self-doubt. But even as her body became stronger, her mind remained a battleground. The pressure of the fight, the weight of the challenge, made it hard for her to focus at times. She had to fight not just Tyler, but her own insecurities. Every time she stumbled, every time she faltered, a small voice in the back of her head whispered, "You're too old for this. You can't win." But Leela refused to let that voice control her. She silenced it with every punch, every kick, every drop of sweat that poured from her body. Her training sessions were intense, often lasting well into the night, with Ben pushing her to her limits. "You've done this before," he would remind her. "You've beaten tougher opponents than him. It's not about strength, it's about strategy. It's about experience." The emotional toll of the training was just as grueling. Leela found herself frustrated at times, questioning her decision. She would catch glimpses of Tyler's mocking social media posts and feel the sting of his words. But each insult, each taunt, fueled her resolve. The more he mocked her, the more she wanted to prove him wrong. Tyler's fans, meanwhile, continued to fan the flames, calling her washed up, telling her she was past her prime, that she was no match for someone like him. It was as if the entire world had already written her off. But Leela wasn't in this for their approval. She was in it to prove to herself that she could still fight, that she could still be a force in the sport. The physical transformation was evident. Layla's muscles became leaner, her reflexes sharper. She was fighting the clock, trying to reclaim the fire she had when she was younger. But it wasn't just her body that had to change. She had to adapt her mindset, break through the walls of doubt, and embrace the new reality that had been thrust upon her. By the time the fight was near, Leela was ready physically and mentally. She knew that no matter how much the public doubted her, no matter how much Tyler taunted her, she had prepared herself to the best of her ability. She had turned the anger and the self-doubt into fuel for her training, and now, standing on the edge of the fight, she knew that the battle ahead would not just be for victory, it would be a battle to redefine what a woman in combat sports could achieve. The stage was set, the public eagerly awaited, and Leela was no longer just fighting for her career. She was fighting for something much bigger, the right to prove that strength wasn't just about age, gender, or size, it was about heart, determination, and the will to rise when the world says you can't. The final weeks leading up to the fight were a blur of relentless media attention. Every moment of Layla's life felt dissected and broadcast for the world to see. Cameras followed her to the gym, capturing every drop of sweat as she trained, every bruise she sustained, and every ounce of effort she poured into the fight. News outlets, eager to sensationalize the clash between her and Tyler, painted her as an underdog, a Cinderella story that had to overcome impossible odds. The headlines, often laced with condescension, seemed to treat her like an anomaly, an unknown fighter in a man's world, a woman in a ring dominated by men. Yet, this attention, while suffocating, fueled her resolve. It wasn't just about the fight anymore, it was about proving herself on a larger stage. But the media wasn't the only source of pressure. Tyler's trash-talking only intensified as the fight drew near. His arrogant smirk and dismissive remarks seemed designed to break her down before the fight even began. He mocked her for being a token fighter and made jabs at her race and gender, trying to reduce her to nothing more than a stereotype. Every insult he threw at her felt like a personal challenge, and yet, it was exactly what she needed to keep pushing. For Leela, each degrading word was more fuel for the fire that burned inside her. But at the same time, it weighed heavily on her shoulders, knowing that every word would be broadcasted to millions. Tyler's insults were not only an attack on her but on everything she represented: her community, her gender, her entire identity. Despite her increasing focus on the fight, Leela began to notice the subtle seeds of doubt creeping in. Some of her supporters, those who had backed her from the start, began to question whether she was truly capable of winning. The whispers, while often whispered in hushed tones, were impossible to ignore. Her status as a woman in the ring, coming from a working-class background, made many uncomfortable. Can she really do it? They wondered aloud. She's up against a professional boxer, after all. Some even suggested that her participation in the fight was little more than a publicity stunt, a way for her to gain fame without any real chance of winning. These doubts, both external and internal, started to gnaw at her. For the first time in a long while, Leela found herself questioning her ability. She had always prided herself on being strong, both physically and mentally, but now she was beginning to wonder if she was truly cut out for this. Her body, which had been her greatest asset, was beginning to feel the toll of the grueling training sessions. Every punch, every round, every day of sparring left her more drained than the last. The pain in her joints, the bruises on her skin, and the exhaustion in her muscles were beginning to pile up. Her physical limitations were becoming more apparent, and though she tried to push through the fatigue, the fear of failure loomed larger and larger. On top of the physical strain, there was the emotional toll. Tyler's mocking comments about her race and gender cut deeper than she liked to admit. She had spent so long fighting to be seen as more than just a woman, more than just a product of her circumstances. Yet, every time he called her a token or laughed at the idea of a woman stepping into the ring with him, it felt like a rejection of everything she had worked for. In a sport that had always been dominated by men, where her skills and abilities were often overshadowed by her gender, his words struck at the very core of her identity as a fighter. Then, on the eve of the fight, the emotional pressure reached a breaking point. Layla's younger brother, Amir, who had always been her rock, expressed his concerns for her safety. He had always seen her as invincible, his older sister who could do anything. But now, with the fight so close, he saw the toll it was taking on her, both physically and mentally. Amir had always been the one to comfort her when she was scared or uncertain, but now, as he looked at her with tears in his eyes, she saw the same fear reflected in his gaze. "You don't have to do this, Leela," he said softly, his voice trembling. "I don't want to lose you. I know you're strong, but this is too much. You've proven everything you need to prove already." His words hit her harder than anything Tyler had said. She had always tried to be the protector for her family, the one who set the example for Amir. She had shown him that anything was possible if you worked hard enough. But now, with her own brother questioning her decision, Leela felt the weight of her choices in a way she never had before. The self-doubt she had been pushing aside for weeks came flooding back, and for a moment, she wondered if Amir was right. Was the fight worth it? Was risking her safety, her future, and her family's peace of mind worth the glory of winning? As she lay in bed that night, trying to calm her racing thoughts, Leela found herself on the verge of a breakdown. The fight loomed before her, and it felt like the culmination of everything she had worked for, yet the fear of failure was overwhelming. She questioned whether her family's concerns were valid, whether the world of boxing was truly the place for someone like her. Could she go on, knowing the doubts of her loved ones, knowing that there were those who thought she wasn't capable of succeeding? But as the hours passed, and the fear began to fade, a realization struck her like a lightning bolt: stepping back now would be worse than failing. If she backed down from this fight, it wouldn't just be a loss in the ring, it would be a loss of everything she had fought for. For years, she had worked tirelessly to prove that she was more than the label that had been placed on her. She had defied the odds, pushed through every barrier that had been placed in her path, and now she was standing on the precipice of the biggest test of her life. She couldn't back down, not when she had come this far. Not when she had worked so hard to get to this moment. Not when there were so many people watching, waiting to see if she would succeed or fall. And most importantly, not when she knew there were other women, like her, watching her every move, waiting to see if she could prove that a woman could hold her own in a male-dominated sport. Leela had to win, not just for herself, but for every woman who had ever been told she wasn't strong enough, fast enough, or capable enough. This fight was no longer just about boxing, it was about showing the world that women belonged in the ring, that they could compete, and that they could succeed. It was about showing her brother, her family, and the world that she was more than just a token fighter. She was a fighter, plain and simple. And she wasn't going to back down now. As the day of the fight approached, Layla's resolve solidified. The doubts, the pain, the fear they would have to take a back seat. The world was watching, and she wasn't about to let them see her fail. From the very moment the bell rang, the atmosphere in the arena shifted. The crowd's excitement was palpable, a mixture of anticipation and disbelief that Leela, an underdog in every sense of the word, was about to face off with Tyler, a fighter with a reputation for being unbeatable. Tyler's arrogance was evident as he strutted to the center of the ring, his confidence exuding from every step. He believed the fight was already his, that Leela was just another opponent to be dismissed. But what he didn't know was that Leela had come to this moment with an unwavering resolve, one that was about to change the course of the fight and her life. The first round was everything Tyler had expected: brutal, dominant, and one-sided. Tyler's punches landed with devastating force, knocking Leela to the mat repeatedly. Each time she hit the canvas, the crowd gasped, a mixture of sympathy and surprise in their voices. The arena was electric with the energy of the crowd's anticipation, many expecting the fight to end quickly, with Tyler emerging victorious, just as they had predicted. Layla's body ached, her head ringing with the impact of each blow, but her spirit remained intact. The sound of the audience cheering for Tyler, combined with the sting of defeat, could have broken anyone's resolve, but not Layla's. As she lay on the floor after another punishing hit, something inside her shifted. The pain coursing through her body wasn't a signal to give up, it was a reminder of why she had fought to get here in the first place. She wasn't just fighting for recognition, for others to see her worth. She was fighting for herself, for the pride and strength she had built over years of hard work. As the referee began the count, Leela felt the adrenaline surge through her veins. She pushed herself up, not just physically, but emotionally, making a promise to herself that she would not let the fight end like this. Tyler, meanwhile, was still basking in his dominance, unaware that the tide was slowly beginning to shift. He had underestimated Leela from the start, treating her as nothing more than a warm-up for his next big victory. But the moment she stood back up, shaking off the effects of the blows, it was clear that she wasn't going to let this fight define her in the way he thought. The crowd, initially stunned by her resilience, began to rally behind her, sensing that something more was happening than just a typical fight. They saw the shift in Layla's eyes, a flicker of defiance, of strength that wasn't going to be easily broken. The second round started with Leela still feeling the physical toll of the punches, but now there was something more in her movements, purpose. Her body had endured the worst of Tyler's strength, but her mind was clearer than it had been all along. Each jab, each counter, wasn't just a move in the ring, it was a declaration. She wasn't going to prove herself to Tyler or to the crowd. She was fighting to prove to herself that she could rise above the limits she had once placed on herself. This realization, this shift in mindset, was the turning point she had been waiting for. Tyler's overconfidence began to show as he rushed in, thinking he could easily land another devastating blow. But Layla's agility, once seemingly lost under the weight of her injuries, returned. She moved with a fluidity that caught Tyler off guard. With each strike, Layla's confidence grew. She wasn't just reacting to Tyler's attacks anymore, she was controlling the pace of the fight. Her technique was sharp and measured, each jab landing with precision. Where Tyler relied on his raw strength, Leela relied on her agility, her training, and her strategy. The crowd, once divided, was now in awe of the transformation they were witnessing. Leela was no longer the underdog, they could see her evolving before their eyes, not just physically, but mentally. Her strategy began to shine through, and Tyler, for the first time, looked uncertain. The arrogance that had fueled his early confidence began to waver as Leela landed a series of jabs that rattled him. She danced around him, slipping past his punches with ease, her footwork tight and controlled. Every move was deliberate, every counter calculated to leave Tyler off balance. Then, in a moment that stunned everyone, Leela landed a critical blow. It wasn't a lucky punch, nor was it a fluke, it was a perfectly timed strike, a combination of skill and heart that knocked the wind out of Tyler. He stumbled back, his hands raised instinctively to protect himself, but it was too late. The audience, previously certain of Tyler's victory, was now in shock. The sound of the punch landing echoed throughout the arena, and for the first time, Tyler seemed genuinely rattled. His arrogance had been replaced with a dawning realization that he was no longer in control. The atmosphere in the arena shifted once again, but this time, it was in Leela's favor. The crowd erupted into cheers, not because they had expected her to win, but because they were witnessing something truly remarkable, a fighter not just surviving the storm, but rising above it. Tyler, in that moment, saw her for what she truly was, a competitor, a force to be reckoned with. He had underestimated her from the beginning, and now, it was too late to recover. Leela, on the other hand, felt an overwhelming sense of empowerment. The pain that had threatened to break her earlier now fueled her every move. The exhaustion that had almost taken over became her driving force, pushing her to keep going, to finish what she had started. She wasn't just fighting for a victory, she was fighting to prove to herself that she was capable of much more than she had ever imagined. The battle wasn't just physical, it was mental and emotional, and in that moment, Leela understood that she had already won, regardless of the outcome of the fight. As the rounds continued, Leela's confidence grew with each passing minute. She had found her rhythm, and Tyler, despite his brute strength, could no longer match her precision and resilience. The tide had turned in her favor, and it was clear that Leela was in control. When the final bell rang, the audience, who had once doubted her, now stood in awe of her transformation. They had witnessed the moment she stopped fighting for anyone else's approval and began fighting solely for herself. And in that moment, Leela realized that no matter what happened next, she had already proven everything she needed to prove. Leela walked through the quiet streets in the hours after the fight, her body bruised, aching, and swollen, but her mind far more fragmented. The fight itself had been intense, a grueling match of will and strength that had pushed her to her limits. She hadn't won in the traditional sense, but she had left Tyler battered and humiliated, and that, in itself, felt like a victory. The audience had cheered as she stood her ground, even when the odds were stacked against her, and for a brief moment, she had felt a surge of respect, not just from her opponent but from the crowd as well. Yet, despite the applause, despite the small sense of accomplishment, something gnawed at her. Tyler's fans, the media, and even some of her own supporters were quick to question whether she truly belonged in the ring. Was the fight a fluke? Had she really earned her place there, or was it just a stroke of luck that allowed her to stand toe-to-toe with one of the sport's best? The criticisms flooded in from all sides, each comment more venomous than the last, and they hurt more than Leela was willing to admit. She tried to push it all down, tried to focus on the positive aspects of the fight, her strength, her resilience, the way she'd made Tyler look vulnerable. But no matter how hard she tried, the voices of the doubters seemed to drown out her own. Even the physical wounds, though painful, seemed easier to heal. She had been in fights before, her body was no stranger to the ache of a bruise or the burn of a strained muscle, but the emotional wounds she carried from the aftermath of the fight felt like something she couldn't shake. The judgment, the mocking comments from people who had never stepped foot in a ring, made her question herself. She had faced the physical pain of the fight, but the emotional toll was something she hadn't fully prepared for. Tyler, on the other hand, had brushed off the defeat. His fans were quick to come to his defense, and despite the damage Leela had done to his pride, he remained cocky, almost unbothered by the loss. He laughed it off in interviews, dismissing her efforts as nothing more than a fluke, a stroke of good fortune. The more he minimized the fight, the more it seemed like the world was letting him do so without consequence. He was the golden boy, and no matter what had happened in the ring, he would remain untouchable in the eyes of the public. But Leela wasn't concerned with Tyler's narrative anymore. The more she reflected on the fight, the more she realized that the true victory wasn't in the outcome. It wasn't about who walked out of the ring with their hand raised, or who had more bruises to show. The real victory had been in the way she had stood up to Tyler, in the way she had defied not just her opponent but the expectations of everyone who had written her off before she even stepped foot in the ring. She had shown them that she could hold her ground, that she wasn't some passing curiosity, a woman who didn't belong in a male-dominated sport. She had proven that she deserved to be there just as much as anyone else. But despite the clarity that was beginning to settle in, Leela still found herself isolated. The loneliness she felt in the aftermath of the fight was suffocating. People who had once supported her began to distance themselves, unsure of how to reconcile the woman they thought they knew with the person she had become after facing such intense public scrutiny. She had always been the quiet, humble one, the one who didn't seek the spotlight. But now, it felt like the world was looking at her, waiting for her to either rise or fall, and the pressure was starting to weigh on her. The truth was, Leela wasn't just fighting against Tyler. She was fighting against a world that didn't think women belonged in the same space as men, especially in a sport like boxing. Her every move, every step forward, had been met with resistance not just from her opponents in the ring, but from society at large. Even after the fight, the doubts lingered. Had she really earned her spot, or was she just a novelty? Was she just a token woman in a man's world, here for a brief moment before being forgotten? Those questions gnawed at her, eroding her confidence little by little. But as the days passed, something inside Leela shifted. She started to realize that her worth was not tied to public approval, and certainly not to Tyler's opinion of her. It wasn't about winning the fight or proving herself to anyone, it was about standing up to the system, about showing the world that women had a place in boxing, in spaces that had been long dominated by men. It was about breaking the barrier, and by doing so, paving the way for others like her. She thought back to the fight, to the moments where she had kept pushing, when she refused to let Tyler's arrogance break her. She had made mistakes, sure, she had taken some hits that could have been avoided, but she had kept fighting. She had held her own, and that was something no one could take away from her. And that, more than any win or loss, was what mattered. Leela began to focus less on the public opinion and more on her own journey. She realized that she wasn't in this for the approval of others. She wasn't in the ring to win a popularity contest. She was there because she loved boxing, because it was a part of her that no one could take away. She wasn't just trying to prove herself to the world, she was proving something to herself. She was breaking the mold of what people expected from a female boxer, and in doing so, she was creating space for others to follow. Slowly, the criticism began to lose its sting. She stopped reading the online comments and stopped worrying about what the media had to say. Tyler's defeat might have been written off as a fluke by some, but the truth was, it didn't matter. She knew who she was. She knew what she had done. And that was enough. Leela wasn't just a boxer. She was a symbol of resilience, of defiance, of strength in the face of adversity. She had faced the doubt, the skepticism, and the criticism, and she had survived. She had made it through the fight, not by punching harder, but by refusing to be silenced. And that, Leela realized, was the real victory. Leela could feel the weight of the world pressing down on her as she walked through the gym doors each morning. It wasn't the same place it used to be. The air, once filled with the hum of focused energy, now felt thick with judgment. Every time she wrapped her hands and stepped into the ring for another round of practice, she couldn't shake the feeling that the eyes of the world were watching her, not in support, but in skepticism. The media, ever eager to latch onto something new, had turned her debut match into a spectacle. They didn't care about her passion for the sport, her dedication, or the hours she spent training. All they saw was a woman who had entered the male-dominated world of boxing, and the aftermath of her loss became the perfect headline: the woman who dared, but couldn't deliver. It wasn't just the media that weighed on her mind. In the gym, the murmurs were getting louder, though no one had the courage to say it to her face. The truth hung in the air: Leela was seen as a novelty. The other fighters, while polite and encouraging, couldn't hide their doubts about her abilities. They had supported her when she first stepped into the gym, cheering her on as she trained for that first big fight, but the loss had cast a shadow over her achievements. To them, she was just a woman who had been lucky enough to get a shot at the big time but ultimately didn't belong there. They respected her for stepping up, but they didn't believe she had what it took to make it to the top. The idea that Leela was anything more than a one-time curiosity was becoming harder to argue. What hurt the most was the voice of Tyler, her opponent, who had publicly mocked her ever since their fight. His smugness was a constant reminder of her perceived failure. Tyler's interviews, posted across social media and blasted on sports channels, were relentless. He called her a novelty act, a joke in the ring, and a woman who got far more attention than she deserved. He made sure to tell anyone who would listen that the only reason she was ever taken seriously was because of the media hype surrounding her, nothing more. Each barb he threw stung deeper than the last. Leela could feel his words echoing in her mind, gnawing at her sense of self. She had fought with everything she had, but the reality of her loss both in the ring and in the eyes of the public was suffocating. She questioned herself constantly: am I really cut out for this? The dreams she had held so tightly now seemed distant and fragile. What was the point of continuing if all people saw was a failed attempt at something they believed was impossible? The passion that had driven her to become a boxer was beginning to feel like a distant memory, overshadowed by the constant barrage of negative feedback and the self-doubt it triggered. Her friends at the gym, the ones who had supported her since the beginning, continued to rally around her. They told her to ignore the haters, to keep training, to let her skills speak for themselves. But Leela wasn't sure she could keep doing it. How many more months could she spend working herself into the ground, only to be told that she didn't belong? The whispers from her fellow fighters, the mocking tone of Tyler, and the ceaseless media attention had begun to chip away at her resolve. She had been so sure of herself before the fight, so certain that she could prove everyone wrong. But now, she couldn't shake the fear that the very thing she had fought for, her place in the ring, was slipping through her fingers. Leela knew she needed to find a way to deal with these feelings, but it wasn't easy. Every time she stepped into the gym, she felt as though everyone was watching her, waiting for her to fail again. She couldn't help but think that maybe they were right, that maybe this wasn't her world. After all, boxing was a sport built on strength, speed, and endurance, qualities she still struggled to fully master. But beyond the physical limitations, there was a deeper question that haunted her: was she really made for this? It wasn't just the public perception that wore her down, it was the constant battle within herself. Leela had always been someone who fought for what she wanted. She had spent her whole life proving that she was more than the world expected of her, a woman who could hold her own in a man's world. But now, she couldn't help but wonder if that same world would ever truly accept her. The reality of failure had become so overwhelming that it began to cloud her vision. The longer she lingered in this place of uncertainty, the harder it became to see a path forward. One night, after a particularly grueling training session, Leela found herself sitting alone in the gym, exhausted and disheartened. The sound of punching bags being hit in the distance, the rhythm of the other fighters sparring, it felt so far removed from her own sense of purpose. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, taking in the tired eyes, the bruises that still marked her body. She had always believed that pushing through the struggle would lead to something greater, but now, it felt like she was simply fighting to hold on to something that was slipping away. As she sat there, a thought struck her: what if this is the point where I decide who I am? She had spent so much time wondering if she could fit into the world of boxing, if she could prove herself to the public and her critics, that she had lost sight of why she started in the first place. Boxing had been her escape, her place of strength, not a means to prove anything to anyone. She remembered the early days, how boxing had given her a sense of purpose, a place where she could push her limits and feel alive. The passion that had first ignited her desire to fight hadn't disappeared. It had simply been overshadowed by the noise of others. Layla's inner turmoil was not unique. Every fighter faced moments of doubt, but not all of them were willing to confront those moments. Leela understood now that it wasn't the judgment of others that mattered. What mattered was how she chose to see herself, how she chose to fight, not just in the ring, but for herself. She had spent too long trying to meet the expectations of the world around her, and in doing so, had forgotten what it meant to fight for her own dreams, not for the approval of others. With newfound clarity, Leela made a decision. She wasn't going to let Tyler or anyone else define her. She wasn't a novelty act, as he had said, and she wasn't just a woman in the ring. She was a boxer, and that was all that mattered. She could fight with every ounce of her being, not because she needed to prove something to anyone, but because she believed in herself. The next time she stepped into that ring, it wouldn't be about her failure, it would be about her fight. The fight to reclaim her sense of worth, her dreams, and her place in the sport she loved. Leela wasn't done yet. And this time, it was her own voice she was going to listen to. Leela stares at herself in the mirror, the weight of her thoughts settling heavily on her shoulders. The doubt that had crept in after her last loss still lingers, but she's no longer willing to let it define her. The stinging memory of Tyler's mocking words, the skepticism from those around her, and the feeling of falling short, all flood back to her. Yet, something has shifted inside her, a quiet but undeniable strength that refuses to stay hidden any longer. She's spent days replaying the loss, analyzing every misstep, every moment where she could have pushed harder, been better, but now she knows that the real battle is not just with her opponent, it's with herself. She can't afford to waste any more time questioning her worth or her abilities. She has to prove something far more important, that she is capable, that she has the heart, the skill, and the resolve to be a force in the boxing world. The journey that brought her here, the path from self-doubt to determination, has not been an easy one. For years, Leela has been trying to prove herself in a male-dominated sport where she constantly feels the need to outdo expectations, to show that she can stand shoulder to shoulder with the best. After her last fight with Tyler, she had nearly given up. The defeat crushed her physically, emotionally, mentally, but it also awakened something deep inside her. The feeling of failure, the sting of rejection, had been overwhelming, yet it was also a moment of clarity. She could either succumb to the shame and let it consume her, or she could rise, redefine her purpose, and come back stronger than ever. Her friends, her family, and especially her coach, have all stood by her, offering words of encouragement when she needed them most. They've reminded her time and time again that one loss does not define a fighter, that it's the ability to rise after defeat that separates the great from the rest. Their support has been a lifeline, but ultimately, Leela knows that the change has to come from within. She has to believe in herself, and that belief has to be unwavering. It's in these quiet moments of self-reflection that Leela begins to formulate her plan. This time, she's not going to fight to prove Tyler or anyone else wrong. She's done seeking validation from others. The fight ahead is not about earning respect or seeking approval, it's about proving to herself that she has what it takes to be a true contender. She isn't just looking for a rematch with Tyler, she's preparing to face the internal battle that has held her back for so long. Leela takes out her notebook, the pages already filled with previous plans, notes, and strategies. She starts fresh, mapping out a training schedule that focuses on more than just physical strength. Her body has always been her asset, but it's her mind and her emotions that need the most work. Boxing isn't just about throwing punches or mastering footwork, it's about mental toughness, focus, and discipline. She needs to master her emotions, stay calm under pressure, and trust herself even when things aren't going according to plan. This is where her true fight lies. She begins training harder than ever, dedicating herself to every aspect of her craft. Early mornings at the gym, sweat dripping as she hits the heavy bag with ferocity, her fists moving in a rhythmic blur. She works on her speed, her endurance, and her precision, every punch calculated, every movement intentional. But it's not just her physical strength she's working on. She spends just as much time focusing on mental techniques, practicing mindfulness to stay centered and present in the ring. Her coach leads her through visualization exercises, helping her imagine every scenario in the ring, from the opening bell to the final round. Leela learns to control her breath, to slow her heart rate, to fight with a calm clarity that she had never believed was possible before. Each day, Leela feels herself growing not just in strength, but in resilience. She knows that the road to the rematch won't be easy, and there will be moments when she'll want to give up, when doubt will creep back in. But each time that happens, she pushes harder, reminding herself why she's doing this. She's not doing it for anyone else, she's doing it for herself. She's fighting for the woman she knows she can be, for the fighter she's worked so hard to become. The more she trains, the more her confidence begins to shift. She's no longer focused on Tyler or anyone who has ever doubted her. She's focused on herself, on the belief that she has the skill, the strength, and the willpower to overcome any obstacle. This is no longer about revenge or getting back at someone, it's about showing the world, but more importantly, herself, what she's truly capable of. She also recognizes that this process isn't just about physical transformation, it's about mental and emotional growth. She's learned to reframe the way she thinks about herself as a fighter. The insecurities that used to haunt her, the thoughts that told her she wasn't good enough or strong enough, are now being replaced with affirmations of her own worth. She's come to understand that a true fighter doesn't measure success by how many victories they rack up, but by how they handle defeat, how they grow, and how they continue to show up for themselves. Every day in the gym, every drop of sweat, every bruise, every aching muscle, builds not only her body but her resolve. The physical pain is real, but it's temporary. The strength she's building inside herself will last long after the fight. And when the rematch with Tyler comes, she knows she will be ready not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. But it's not just about the fight itself, it's about what happens after. Leela understands that winning doesn't erase the years of self-doubt, and losing doesn't negate her worth. It's the journey that has changed her. The woman who steps into the ring against Tyler will not be the same one who faced him before. This time, she is fighting not just for a victory, but for her own sense of self, for her own recognition of her abilities. The fight is now about claiming the strength she's always had, and showing the world that she's not defined by any one loss or anyone else's opinion. As the rematch draws near, Leela is focused, centered, and prepared. She has trained harder than ever, but more than anything, she has transformed from the inside out. The fight is not just a physical contest, it is a representation of her emotional and mental growth. Leela knows that no matter the outcome, she has already won. The woman who steps into the ring will be a true champion, because she's fought not just for victory, but for herself. The atmosphere in the arena was electric, buzzing with an intensity that seemed to pulse through the very walls. The anticipation was palpable, as fans and experts alike awaited the long-anticipated rematch between Leela and Tyler. The first fight had ended controversially, leaving a bitter taste in the mouths of many. Now, there was no more talk of what-ifs, no more doubts about Leela's abilities. This time, it was all about proving herself once and for all. Tyler entered the ring first, walking with the swagger that had become his trademark. His shoulders were squared, his jaw set, and the cocky grin he wore said it all. He believed, without a shadow of a doubt, that this would be another easy win for him. The crowd cheered, some in admiration, others with a sense of resignation, knowing that Tyler's arrogance often preceded his dominance in the ring. He was undefeated, and he had the physical power to back up his words. Leela, on the other hand, entered with a calm that contrasted sharply with Tyler's brash energy. She walked to the center of the ring with quiet confidence, her eyes locked onto her opponent. There was no cockiness in her stride, just a focused determination that spoke volumes about the journey she had taken to get here. Every sacrifice, every drop of sweat, every moment of doubt she had faced and overcome had led to this moment. This was her time. The bell rang, and the rematch began. From the very first round, it was clear that Leela had prepared differently this time. Gone was the wild energy of their first fight, where she had been caught off guard by Tyler's forceful attacks. Now, every movement she made was deliberate, every step taken with purpose. She circled Tyler, carefully studying his movements, his body language, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Tyler, as expected, came out strong, his punches landing with heavy force. He aimed for quick jabs, hoping to overwhelm Leela early on, but she was ready. Leela ducked and weaved, using her agility to avoid his blows with impressive precision. When Tyler attempted to land a heavy right hook, Leela countered with a swift left jab to his ribs, the impact echoing through the arena. The crowd roared in approval, and for the first time, a hint of uncertainty flickered across Tyler's face. Round after round, Tyler's usual confidence began to waver. Leela's defense was flawless, her footwork impeccable. She had clearly studied Tyler's previous fights, analyzing his every move, and she was using that knowledge to outmaneuver him at every turn. He tried to take control of the pace, to dominate the ring with his raw power, but Leela wasn't intimidated. Instead of matching him blow for blow, she used her speed and intelligence to tire him out, countering his wild punches with calculated strikes that scored points and left Tyler visibly frustrated. By the third round, Tyler's arrogance had started to crack. He was breathing heavier now, his fists slower, his movements less fluid. Leela, on the other hand, seemed to grow more focused with each passing minute, her stamina holding strong as she executed her strategy with ruthless efficiency. She moved with the grace of a dancer, her footwork sharp and precise, and with each strike she landed, Tyler's confidence shrank just a little more. The arena was on the edge of its seat, the fight turning into a display of strategy over sheer power. In the fourth round, the tension in the air was thick. Tyler had become more desperate, throwing punches with reckless abandon in an attempt to knock Leela out of the fight. He was no longer the composed, calculating fighter that had dominated so many of his previous matches. He was a man trying to salvage his pride. Leela saw it for what it was, a flaw in his game that she could exploit. With a swift sidestep, she dodged his wild uppercut and closed the distance between them. Tyler's exhaustion was beginning to show, his movements slower, more predictable. Leela's timing was perfect. She caught him with a stunning combination, a quick jab to his face followed by a hard left hook to his midsection, then a swift right cross to his jaw. The punch landed with such force that Tyler staggered backward, his knees buckling slightly. The crowd gasped as they realized that this fight was slipping away from Tyler. Round after round, Tyler's arrogance had given way to doubt. The longer the fight went on, the more apparent it became that Leela had control. In a way, it wasn't just her boxing technique that had won her the upper hand, it was her mental fortitude. She wasn't just fighting Tyler, she was fighting every critic, every person who had doubted her from the beginning. This was her redemption, and with each round, she was proving that she was more than capable of taking on the very best. As they entered the final round, it was clear that Tyler was running on fumes. His punches were slower, his defense weaker, and his confidence shattered. Leela, on the other hand, was a picture of calm precision. She had one last move to make. She could feel it in the way Tyler moved, or, rather, how he didn't move. He was exhausted, vulnerable, and she knew that this was her moment. In a breathtaking sequence, Leela feigned a jab to Tyler's face, causing him to flinch and drop his guard for just a split second. With lightning speed, she unleashed a powerful right hook to his temple. The punch landed with a sickening thud, and Tyler's body seemed to go limp before he collapsed to the canvas in a heap. The arena went silent for a brief moment before the crowd erupted into an explosion of cheers. Leela stood over him, breathing heavily but steady, her chest rising and falling with the rhythm of the moment. Tyler remained on the canvas, his eyes wide with shock, unable to comprehend what had just happened. He had been knocked out cold, and it was clear that he had underestimated the woman who had come to defeat him. The referee moved in quickly, raising Leela's hand in victory. The crowd continued to cheer, but Leela's focus was on the man lying on the canvas. She hadn't just won the fight, she had shattered the illusion of invincibility that Tyler had built around himself. This wasn't just a victory for her, it was a statement to the entire sport. Leela had proven that technique, discipline, and intelligence could defeat raw power and arrogance. As the cheers echoed through the arena, Tyler slowly regained his senses, looking up at Leela. The shock on his face was mirrored by the astonishment of everyone in the room. Leela had done what no one had expected, she had beaten him at his own game. In the aftermath of the fight, it wasn't just the victory that mattered. It was the respect Leela had earned, not only from the crowd but from the boxing community as a whole. She had shown that she was more than just a fighter, she was a force to be reckoned with, someone who had earned her place in the sport. Tyler might have lost the fight, but in that moment, it was clear, Leela had won far more than just the match. She had won the respect of everyone watching. Layla's victory in the ring was more than just a win, it was a statement. As she stood there, her arms raised in triumph, the applause reverberated in her ears, not just from the crowd, but from a boxing world that had long underestimated her. The fight had been difficult, but it wasn't just about the physical battle, it was about something far deeper, the battle against perceptions, against stereotypes, and against a system that had been slow to recognize the true potential of women in the sport. Layla had not only earned the victory through sheer grit and determination, she had earned it by proving to herself, and to the world, that she belonged. Her opponent, Tyler, though battered and bruised, had no choice but to acknowledge the power of Layla's skill and strength. Humbled by the defeat, Tyler extended a gesture of apology. It wasn't just a simple "I'm sorry" but a recognition of the respect he now held for her as a fighter. His apology, though sincere, wasn't the defining moment of the fight. What mattered more was the shift in how the world viewed Layla. For years, the narrative around her had been clouded by doubt. She was a woman in a man's sport, a race against expectations that seemed stacked in her favor only by her relentless will. But now, that narrative was no longer relevant. The media, which had once been quick to focus on her gender, her background, and her differences, now had no choice but to acknowledge her accomplishments on their own merit. Layla's victory was no longer just about breaking barriers, it was about the raw skill, the dedication, and the heart that had carried her to the top. The shift in public perception was immediate. The headlines that had once sensationalized her gender and race now shifted to focus solely on her abilities as a boxer. No longer was she the first woman to or the underdog. She was simply Layla, a force in the boxing world, a true champion in her own right. The discussions around her now centered on her knockout punch, her tactical brilliance in the ring, and her unwavering discipline. It wasn't just the boxing critics who took note, but the fans as well. The audience, which had once been skeptical, now cheered her on with the same fervor they would give to any other fighter who had proven their worth. Layla had earned that respect. In the gym, the atmosphere had also shifted. Layla's trainers and sparring partners now regarded her not as an anomaly, but as a serious contender in the sport. Her work ethic had always been unmatched, but now her results were visible to everyone. She was no longer the female boxer or the black boxer, she was simply a boxer, a fighter who had risen to the top through skill, perseverance, and a relentless pursuit of excellence. Layla's training sessions were filled with the same intensity they had always had, but there was now a heightened sense of focus from both her and those around her. The fight with Tyler had changed everything, but it hadn't altered the core of who Layla was. She was still the same fighter who had first laced up her gloves, still driven by the same desire to prove herself not to the world, but to herself. Layla's transformation wasn't just in how the world viewed her, but in how she viewed herself. The years of doubt and struggle, the constant fight to be taken seriously, had built something in her, a quiet confidence that came not from external validation, but from the internal realization that she had done the impossible. She had broken through the walls that had been built around her, not by force, but with the grace and skill that only true champions possess. Layla had fought her own battles against expectations, against prejudices, and against anyone who ever told her she couldn't. And now, as she stood in the ring, victorious, she had become the very symbol of resilience. Her legacy was now cemented. No longer would people question whether a woman could compete at the highest levels of boxing. No longer would they debate whether a woman's body could withstand the brutal demands of the sport. Layla had shown the world that boxing was a sport defined by heart and skill, not by gender or race. She had opened the door for other women to follow in her footsteps, for other fighters to see that there were no limits, only the barriers they set for themselves. As the story progressed, Leela found herself standing at the precipice of even greater challenges. The victory over Tyler had put her on the map, but it was only one step in a journey that was far from over. She had proven herself in one fight, but boxing was a world full of constant competition, ever-evolving techniques, and fighters who were always pushing the limits of what was possible. But Leela was ready. She was no longer just the woman who took on a boxer, she was the woman who had taken on the world and won. And she wasn't about to stop now. The final scenes left Leela standing tall, her posture strong, her eyes focused on the horizon. There was no arrogance in her stance, no cocky smile. Instead, there was a quiet, undeniable confidence. Leela had found her place in the world of boxing, and now, she was ready to face whatever challenge came next. Her journey had been about more than just success in the ring, it had been about proving to herself and the world that she was capable of overcoming anything that stood in her way. As the crowd's cheers echoed in the background, Leela knew that her greatest victory was not the one she had just secured, but the one she had fought for within herself: self-belief, resilience, and the courage to take on the world. With a determined stride, Leela walked out of the ring, her head held high. The world had changed its perception of her, but the woman who had always believed in her own potential remained unchanged. What came next didn't matter, it would be another challenge, another opportunity to prove herself, and another chance to show the world that Leela was here to stay.